So our first speaker is Mr. Samir Hamdani. Hakim Samir Hamdani is the design director at Intact Kashmir, whose primary area of research is in the field of Islamic religious architecture in South Asia. He has widely written on the Muslim material culture of Kashmir. His major conservation projects are the reconstruction of the 18th century wooden shrine of Pir Dastagir Sahib and the conservation of Ali Masjid at Eidgah, Srinagar, both of which were longlisted for the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. His book, based on his doctoral research, The Syncretic Traditions of Islamic Religious Architecture of Kashmir, early 14th to 18th century, was published by Routledge in March 2021. His forthcoming book, Shiism in Kashmir, A History of Sunni-Shia Rivalry and Reconciliation, is being published by IB Taurus, January 2023. He's also editing a book on the Mughal gardens of Kashmir for Intact Kashmir. And how we met is way more interesting for me through Mr. Salim Beg, who also happens to work with Intact Kashmir. And I met him when floods happened in Kerala. And we were meeting for a conference on disaster management of heritage. And I was there to talk about what we could do with archival material. And for me, it's still a question, how do you revive intangible heritage after disaster? We don't still have enough systems for it. So it's so interesting that we meet people through people. And for me, Samir's work is as new and exciting as all of you. So thank you so much for accepting the invitation and joining us here. Next with us is Suhasini Krishnan, and she's going to talk on Reiki mapping and fieldwork. This is a project I've been closely watching, and I'm very excited to see what the process behind it has been. With the object of creating the first and only archive of Mumbai's modern living heritage, Art Deco Mumbai has been identifying and mapping Art Deco structures across the city since its inception in May 2016. This is a staggering volume of work made possible through a systematic documentation initiative. This initiative draws from the organization's deep-rooted conviction that documentation is an important and essential first step towards conservation. I'm going to add even preservation, for that matter of fact, before these buildings go away. Without a physical assessment of the built form, one has little information to draw further inferences from. Through her presentation, what Suhasini, who's the junior editor and creative producer at Art Deco Mumbai, she'll shed light on the importance and the different parts of this process, and what are the objectives identified at the beginning of any documentation campaign, and the tools that could be useful for different kinds of projects. And this is exactly why we haven't really touched upon the technical aspects in the first half. So this is to quickly give both our presenters a context, what we have done until now, introductions, of course, but after that, we actually had 3 presenters from the earlier editions of CPA to give everybody a sense of different kinds of archiving projects and where they could start, stop, what kind of emotions that they might deal with, or what kind of issues they might be dealing with, what kind of tools they have themselves used. And from there, we moved on to doing a very quick imaginative exercise on imagining a museum out of the archiving project that we have in the room across the screen. So we have right now engaged in more conceptual conversations, if I put it like that, and we are counting on learning about the technicalities from your end, and of course getting into the discourse of it in the last 30 minutes. With that, I hand it over to you, Sameer.
Hi, good afternoon. I hope I'm audible. So again, I think let me start with the fact that the work that I've been doing since 2004, mostly I'm an architect. Professionally, I'm an architect. So since 2004, we started on a project which was basically about documentation of the built heritage of Srinagar city. We started with Srinagar city, and me and 3 of my colleagues at Intact. And as a process, this was something that actually got you in touch back with the city. I mean, if people who know about Kashmir, the conditions in Kashmir, the political conditions in Kashmir, growing up in 90s was something that wherein you wouldn't even move out of your house. And then I also did my colleging outside Kashmir. So gradually, what I would say that the work I did with INTAC, and it started with the mapping, the cultural mapping, of the resource mapping of the built heritage of Srinagar, was something that stuck with me, and it sort of stuck a chord with you. And as a part of that, after we finish our uh, mapping of the built heritage, there was this one single incident when we went to Mutton. So Mutton is uh, it's a Tirat, rather very sacred and revered Tirat of Kashmiri Pandits, located south of Srinagar. And out there, they have these bahis, which they call the ticket. It's something similar to what you have in Banaras, Hardwar, etc., wherein people and families have a record of who came to that Tirat and where they stayed, with whom did they stay. And there was one of these bayas or ticket that I came to saw, which have these interesting sort of bilingual inscriptions in it, as in family records. On the right, you have a family genealogical table, and this is of a Kashmiri Pandit family, but it is in Persian. On the left, you have something which is in the Devanagari script. So it was rather interesting seeing one of the tickets. Then I thought, and we sort of got in touch with the rest of the Pandits around there. Is it possible to do a documentation of these tickets? There was nothing much more than that happening. Simply a documentation process wherein you have these large ledgers full of information, and mostly it's spread over 19th century to 20th century. They do say they have some older tickets related to the Mughal period, but I didn't see any of them. So basically, the idea was that we start documenting these huge ledgers of family records, and then that will be the first process, the first part of the project. And then let's see how we can better get people interested, scholars and academicians interested in the project, wherein you actually try to decipher what is happening with the sacred site and the community as such. But unfortunately, given the circumstances, the priests around there didn't seem to be interested in the project. We sort of persevered with them for almost a couple of months, but that's what's, I think, it's the general impression when you work with a archive, which is a personal archive, whether it's an individual or it's a family, they have the right to refuse access to it when they want. So after a certain amount of time, you felt that you couldn't sort of get ahead with them, and nothing was happening. But then, more or less, this was something that had interested me about the fact that we have this rich documentary textual history which is available with families. Can we sort of just uh, peep into it and get a glimpse of our past? And then I thought, okay, if I can't do it with the this community, let me start with my own family. So the whole process started with my own family, which is the Mueller family of the Babapura, and this was an image from the 1890s. So this is again a diverse uh, uh, archival record that exists with different individual members. So this is a picture from 1890, but uh, let me get back to it a bit later. So this research, a part of which from this going through the archives of the family, is also something that is foregrounded in my current book, which I hope is out on the market by the year end. It basically touches upon the textual history, but also about these rich and varied family histories and family archives that are located throughout the length and breadth of Kashmir. A part of this is already available. So this is one of the documents from the Swedimulla family. It's a legal document which is located with, I think you might have heard about it, Nandini Chatterjee at the Exeter University. So there is this interesting exercise, and it's available online, wherein you have these Persian legal documents from all across India, but primarily I think Rajasthan and certain other areas, which is available at the website, and you can actually get an idea of what is happening and how the law is actually being enacted in the larger land. So this is basically what we call the genealogical table of this family, the particular family that I started my research with. And as you can see, it's again in Persian, but to give you the idea of how big the family it is, on the left, you have that one small bit of it. In the center is the actual genealogical chart that they have framed. It's done somewhere around in, I think, 1880s. And on the right is something that sort of I started transcribing it and sort of filling it more details as you talked with each and every person in the family today. So if you look at the chart at the right, this is just a blow up of one small section of the family, wherein you get the detail about who was born, the date. Sometimes you have the exact dates, who was born, when he was born, but interestingly we also have records of who was married to whom, and in certain cases you also have the records of women from the family who were married outside the family. So more or less, this gives you a broad idea about the extent to which this archive is dispersed, because as of now, today, I would say there are more than 40 different individual families who are in possession of this dispersed archival record pertaining to just one single family. So with the idea of even collecting it is rather difficult. I mean, many of you must have already worked with families, so it's a rather tedious exercise. Even if you're a part of that very family, access is something that can never be taken for granted. And I've been working on this one particular project for almost a decade now. In the end, it did come out in the form of a book, and it is basically something that builds upon other family records. But the whole idea is so that because of the dispersal of the material into different families, and these are inheritances, and most of the families see them as inheritance. Uh, Trying to get an idea of how vast it is and to compare it is an exercise in itself. Now, what is the basic archive that we are talking about here? So mostly it's about this family was a Persian Ottoman family which came to Kashmir in early 14th century. Late 14th century, sorry. Primarily, they are theologians. So, for almost till the Mughal period in Kashmir, which is around 16th century, the family is a family of preachers and theologians. Then, from 17th century onwards, they get associated with the Mughal courts, and you find there are a great number of poets in the family. Then, in the 18th and 19th century, all of a sudden, you find there's a shift in terms of the professional practices within the family, and they become physicians. So, there is a shift within the profession that's being adopted by a family, and this almost seems to spread across an entire generation and generations. And correspondingly, there are these rich and varied texts which are located with various members of the family. Some of them primarily are books and manuscripts. Many of these manuscripts are not sort of translated, and because they're a part of the Kashmir traditions, many of these manuscripts are also not even known of. So it was rather a fascinating study going through texts, religious or any other, which are primarily still yet to be discovered by the larger world. So this is one of the book with one of the members of the family. It dates back to the manuscript dates back to almost the early 16th century, and you have one of the seals of the king of the Iran at that time. So it's again, many of these manuscripts, many of these texts are also about the transmission of knowledge that was happening between Kashmir and the vast, wider South Asian region, between Kashmir and Delhi, between Kashmir and Lahore, between Kashmir and Awadh in the 19th century, and trans-regional context. You can also speak about the fact that these are also texts that relate to Iran, Iraq, and even in certain cases, areas of Tibet. So the richness of the text is also of the fact that they speak about the transmission of men and knowledge and even wealth, because some of them were also traders that happened across a century or a couple of centuries. I'll just run through the basically the material that I've been able to source through my study with this family. So to give an idea about the richness of the material available. So this is again a, a book on religious studies, and it's an important translation of Islamic law jurisprudence, and also the first translation from Arabic into Persian, and it happens in Kashmir somewhere around in the mid part of the 18th century. While I was going through the text, also what of special interest to me was these texts which are located either as footnotes or as endnotes or on the margins, basically what we call the marginalia. And the amount of information that was available in these texts is really interesting. This is a letter which was written by Hakim Azim. He was the chief physician for Maharaja Gulab Singh, the first Dogra king of Kashmir. He was also a physician associated with the court of Maharaja Ranjit Singh in Lahore. So this basically is on the margins of a book. You find this interesting note, which is about a letter he wrote to Moli Sayyid Rajab Ali. Now, those of you who are aware of the mutiny of 1857, Rajab Ali was one of those four individuals who basically were a part of the British entourage. I mean, they actually rebelled against the Imperial British Mughal family. He was richly awarded by the Britishers, was also given the title of Arastoja, which is the Aristotle of the age. But in this letter, you see there is a correspondence between Kashmiri Shia physician and a Punjab-based landlord and an administrator who would also be a part and a participant in the transfer of authority from of Kashmir from the Sikh Empire to the Dogra. So this is again, it also speaks about the politics that was involved at that period. This specific letter mentions about a riot that occurred in Srinagar city, and it was a Shia Sunni riot that happened in 1801. It mentions about the role of the Afghan Subadar, the governor of Kashmir at period, and how things came out in the open. Now, these are again marginalia in the sense these are texts basically lithographs from 19th century, but on the opening pages, what you find are copies of letters that were written by men. Here you have one of the letters written by Hakim Azim to Sayyid Dildar Ali, who was basically responsible for propagating Shia faith in the court of the Awadh king. So this again shows how trans-regional links were formed at the start of the 19th century between Kashmir as it was undergoing through a political transformation, and these links were and the links that were getting established with another Shia sort of outpost in the wider South Asia, which was the kingdom of Awadh. So on the side you have important details about how we should engage with the court, how you should engage as a Muslim with the native, with the Hindu court, and these are rather interesting insights into a period which was quite transformative, at least as for Kashmir. Now, again, a part of the collection, you find that there are various manuscripts of Quran, and this is a piece of art, I would say. It dates back to the mid part of the 19th century. There was a similar Quran which was recently auctioned at Christie's, and I think it fetched a rather heavy price at the auction. So this is a Quran which is a manuscript of Quran from the mid 19th century, which is again a part of the inheritance of this family, and again it's located with one of the members of the family. Beautiful example of the art of illumination that Kashmir was famous for, especially as we come to 19th century. We get a good amount of similar examples of illuminating a manuscript in Kashmir. But this is one of the best examples, and it's also dated. So these are rarely do you find Quran copies which are actually dated, and you also have the name of the calligrapher as well as the artisan, which is the case in this Quran. Again, from this very family archive, I came across this Diwan Hafiz, which was sort of copied by Mullah Qasim Hamdani. But what is also interesting about this particular manuscript is the paintings. There are these small paintings, almost 20 paintings within the manuscript. And these are the only example that we have of the art of painting in Kashmir during the Afghan period. So this is when Kashmir was ruled by the Afghans from Kabul. So we know that Kashmir had a tradition of painting. Many of the miniature painters at the Mughal court and the calligraphers were from Kashmir. But this is the only example so far that I've been able to find out from Kashmir itself, from the Afghan, dating back to Afghan rule, which is again 18th century, late 18th century, early 19th century. Interesting for any art lover or sort of for study of the art of that period. As I said, the copies for this manuscript is Mullah Qasim Hamdani. And then again, if we go back to the text that I've been able to locate within the family, there's this, on the side of one of the books, you find this letter written by the same person, Mullah Qasim. He's also mentioned as Munshi Qasim, and he writes a letter to Raja Dinanath of Lahore, who was the Diwan of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So again, the sort of the accumulated knowledge you get of the period from a diverse set of these manuscripts builds upon the knowledge that we have for this period. Again, given the importance of how Kashmir was located at this period, how the political and the social and the cultural links were between Kashmir and the rest of South Asia, this I also found within one of the family archives was a letter written by Munshi Talib Ali to Nawab of Khairpur. It offers condolences on the death of his three sons, but importantly, it also mentions about certain traders who were a part of that trade link, the Pashmina, carrying the Pashmina shawls from Kashmir to the court of the Nawab of Khairpur, which is in Sindh, and further ahead into Kirman. So additionally, the amount of information that gets built up in these archives is fascinating. These are basically what we call the Qattai Tariq. So with one of the family, I found a bayaz. This is what we call a bayaz, which is a loose sort of a bounded manuscript, but the compilation has taken place at multiple at different periods of history. I mean, it's not a single compilation. It's not authored by one single person. It can be a sort of a family record passed from generation to generation and generation. So interestingly, in this part of the bayaz, you have all the sort of the records of the date of the birth and date of the death, including marriage, wedding happening within the family. So it does help you in understanding these sort of the wider linkages between families in 19th century, 18th century and 19th century Kashmir, how these were occurring. And that is something that has rather helped me also in building upon the genealogical chart that I showed at the very onset, which is about who were the families that this family was linked with, where were their daughters going, where were the daughters getting into the family from, I mean, what were the wedding happening at different points of time, which again then correlates with the how was political authority, how was authority within this community is being established at this certain period of time, how were the families linked, and how were they sort of uh, being projecting themselves as the spokesmen for a certain community, which is the Shia community at this period. This is again, I'm just sharing some of the uh, material that I've been able to sort of avail while going through this. This is a copy of another religious manuscript which was done by Mullah Azizullah from the same family, and the uh, work was undertaken at the Skardu fort in 1847. Uh, this I mean, the Skardu area was sort of conquered by the Khalsa army, the Punjab Sikh army, but then it revolted. So this was written while the area of Skardu was in revolt against the Lahore Darbar, and he was a Kashmiri who was being rather well treated, and he mentions about some of the events and occurrences that were happening during this revolt in Skardu. Another sort of uh, uh, book that he had copied, which is basically this speaks about the how books that were coming from a different faith system were also a part of were in circulation. In the sense, this is a Sunni book authored by a Sunni, but the copies here is a Shia. So it speaks about how, in terms of circulation of knowledge, you find that not only Shias but also Sunnis were studying each other's work, and similarly it happens with the Muslims. There are Muslims who are studying, Pandits who are studying Persian texts, and that is a part of their knowledge system, unlike what's happening now today. Sort of a manuscript which is about a Quran written by Mullah Azizullah. Interestingly, at the end, in the colophon, he also mentions about the fact how his nephews were kind enough to provide him with the paper and the rest of the writing material for this Quran. So this is Munshi Hassan Ali. So once we come to the late part of the 19th century, you also have images. You also have these photographs for some of the members of the family. He was a teacher of Persian. He was also a calligrapher, a prominent calligrapher. So one of the collection is specifically from his branch of the family, and it deals with calligraphic albums, ruqas. This is something dating back to 1870. This is what is called khazan-akhun, which is basically calligraphy done with the tip of your thumbnail. So you can just see there's just an impression of the thumbnail on the paper, nothing else. These are again some calligraphic panels. On the left, we have what is known as the marble paper. On the right, it's known as siyah-masht, which is the black ink. Uh, Again, a rather rich collection with the family. But then there is also these Medal of the Delhi Darbar, 1903, and I was able to source out 3 letters from the Viceroy and the resident, wherein they thank Munshi Hassan Ali for having designed the reverse of the Delhi Darbar medal. So this is for Delhi Darbar in 1903, which I think is the coronation of Edward VI as the King Emperor of India. And these are some of the other varied text that I was able to find out from there. This is basically a ode in praise of King George V, which was written by Pandit Silgram Kaul. He was a Kashmiri Pandit, and it is on the coronation of George V, and he sent it to Munshi Hussain Ali to sort of have a look at it and correct the Persian in it. The other collection that I was able to access was from the family of Hakim Muhammad Ali. So he was also a landlord, also was one of the first Kashmiri Shias who sort of studied in under the colonial education system. Uh, he was also a part of the political awakening in Kashmir. So this is the image from the BJ Glincy Commission of Inquiry, which happened in 1931. It's basically part of the broader freedom movement in Kashmir at that period. These are images of him and his family. So what is interesting is that two of his sons were basically trained in Europe. So they happened to be the first Kashmiris who left for Europe to study, in one in Milan, Italy, another in UK. And this is a letter which was written by his eldest son. I think the date is 1928, and I just sort of, you can see the translation, which speaks about the uh, his initial movement from Kashmir towards Bombay and then further on. So there are these series of letters that were written during his training courses, and they give a rather interesting impression about the life as he sort of witnessed it in Europe, and the comparisons between what were things happening back in Kashmir. It's also interesting that once they come back to Kashmir, they also become associated with the freedom movement and the struggle against the Delhi Darbar, Kashmir Darbar. So these are some of the images that you find there. This is again one of the brothers, and he has left around 8-10 diaries, and these are rather interesting in terms of the material that you find. So there is something on the Dead Sea Scroll, there is something from the Buddhist texts, and there is also something about oil concession to India in Iran. So it does give you an idea about, at a certain point of time, what was it that was sort of, how were they engaging with the events and happenings uh, happening in the rest of the India and the wider world, and also their sort of understanding of the traditional Kashmir as it was evolving. This is another of the brothers, and I was also able to find out the document which was about Kashmiri language and the corresponding image. This is their old house, and as an architect, I can't sort of do away without an image of a building. Uh, Generally, you don't find many images of women, especially Kashmiri Muslim women. But from at least till 1950s. So these are the earliest images wherein you find a depiction of any woman in this family, and most of them are from, as you can see, from 1955 onwards. So before 1955, you hardly find any image of any woman anywhere in this family. These are just again the question of how marginalia can uh, make you understand what was happening at the period. These are basic religious texts located within the archives of these families, but on the margins you have different people giving their viewpoint about what is in the end the sacred inherited religious knowledge. And you can see on the side someone has written food for, I think, idiots or ridiculous. I mean, this is sort of the engagement that happens because primarily these are the first generation in the family who have studied in the colonial system of education, and once they're back in Kashmir, they are sort of questioning many aspects of their inherited religious life. Again, something about what you can find on the marginalia of these things. This is basically a document relating to the same family, which was basically a landowner family, and one of the widows is basically issuing a legal notice uh, to take possession of the land. So it shows about the fact that this is something from 1928. Generally, you'd assume a Muslim woman would be in Parta, but here she's actually uh, taking legal aid to sort of safeguard her inheritance. This is another example of a Mukhtarnama. She's again a widow, and this is basically a legal document of how she wants her property to be maintained. Again, and this is from 1885. So this shows that the agency of women that we generally assume in a traditional society, in a traditional patriarchal society, they're just limited to Parda, is not always the case. these are some other documents related to political development. I think these are basically a series of revenue paper, because this is a landowning family that you find out there. And this is something I would rather skip. But then again, the question is that, rather let me end it here. This is just one sort of family archives that I started with, but then as we proceeded, there were other archives that was able to sort of exist, which formed a rather important part of my understanding of a certain period of our history. I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a blast of, I mean, some beautiful archival materials. And I'm only calling it beautiful because so much of it we cannot read. So I'm sure we have a lot of questions for you. How do you deal with this explosion? We'll come to that. So Hasini, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Samir. That was really, really lovely. As Ishita says, I mean, we call it beautiful only because we can't read, but those images of those Qurans and manuscripts are really a sight to behold. Thank you so much for sharing those. I'm just quickly going to share my slides. Just give me a second. Can everyone see my the slide on my screen?
Yes. Yeah, sure.
Okay. So hello everyone, I am Suhasini, as I've already been introduced. Today I'm representing Art Deco Mumbai Trust to talk a bit about the documentation process we have found to be useful since our inception in 2016. I'd like to thank Ishita, of course, for this kind invitation. I think it's also given us a chance to introspect and think about the work that we've been producing. Thank you also to the participants for being here, and I hope that something from our experience is useful for some of your projects. Let me quickly take you through the presentation structure that I have in place today. I'll talk a little bit about Art Deco Mumbai, the work that we do and our objectives. And then I'll spend a little time talking about the importance of photo documentation before I go into the actual practice that we have in place. Our practice is largely divided into two halves. First is field work, which includes recceing neighborhoods, creating the base map, and the actual process of photo documentation. And the second half is what we gather on field and how it's processed once you're back in the office and back on desk. Of course, any documentation process is not without its challenges, so I'll spend a little time talking about that, our ongoing documentation, and our experience in general of documenting Mumbai's modern heritage. So we were founded in 2016 with just a social media presence, with the objective of creating the first and only archive of Mumbai's modern living heritage. Mumbai has an unparalleled density of the Art Deco style of architecture, which is a modern import of the 1930s. It began in Europe, traveled to Americas, and this is also a time where international borders are sort of opening up. So there is through trade, and of course, because Mumbai is a port city, this style was very, very easily adopted in the city. Now, popular opinion dictates that it's Miami that holds the pride of place of having the largest density of Art Deco in the world. But our documentation actually challenges that number. And we have found that Bombay has, if not more, but then just as many Art Deco structures as Miami. Now, of course, this is not a numbers game or any kind of petty competition, but I bring this up to draw attention to the importance of documentation, to even begin to understand the sheer density of this style prevalent in the city. You know, it's an important part of Bombay's history to sort of acknowledge that the city embraced a certain architectural style so wholeheartedly, you know, because it's not just about architecture, but also the kind of lifestyle that architecture brought about. And without acknowledging this, the history of Bombay from the 1930s to the 1950s would be incomplete. Through this documentation, we have also been able to create a single online directory that offers a unified inventory of Art Deco buildings in the city. This is the inventory that I speak of. It's an online map that you can find on our website. Since ours is a public domain archive, the idea is to allow citizens of the city or anyone with an internet connection, basically, to be able to navigate their city and its Art Deco. And this inventory, you can filter this map by location, by Art Deco elements, and by various architectural features, like say balconies or grills or railings. And even if you cannot visit the property physically, the inventory will show you a wide variety of images. It'll show you various angles that highlight the Art Deco-ness of a certain structure. If you look at the map on your screen, there's a whole list of neighborhoods. These are all the neighborhoods that we have documented and is part of our inventory, and this list keeps increasing. And the idea is to make this accessible. So it's almost like a pocket map that you can take and explore the Art Deco structures in the city. You don't need our help. You don't need anyone's help. You just need your cell phone to be able to navigate the city. Our organization is built on 4 main pillars. The first is research, which I don't think I need to explain to this audience. Then is documentation, which is the thrust of today's talk, and I'll come back to that later. We have outreach, which is putting that research and all the work that we've been doing out there through, say, social media, through webinars, through public lectures. We also host walking tours, guided tours in the city. And advocacy, which is advocating for the conservation and chronicling the history of Bombay's Art Deco. Now, since this presentation is about documentation, let me dive into that. Now, what is the importance of photo documentation? Why should we photo document? I think there is no other way to conserve. And like Ishita said at the beginning, this is also an important way to be able to preserve our existing modern living heritage. Documentation, I think, is an essential first step towards any conversation about conservation. You know, what is worth conserving and what isn't is all secondary. Without an assessment, a physical assessment of the built form, you don't know what the density of the style is in the city. You don't know the precarity of the form. You don't know the degree of intervention that might be required to preserve a certain structure. And without this kind of documentation, you don't understand the historical significance of a certain structure. The image that you see on the left is a building called Shanti Kunj in Malad. Now, as you can see, the facade is completely weathered. It's discolored, it's blackened over the years because of being exposed to Bombay's monsoon. But during our documentation, we were able to spot what may have been the original colors of the building. And the image that you see on your right is a creative render, which is our take of what the building may have looked like in its original form, based on the little information that we could gather during the documentation process. Now, this is a creative process that Art Deco Mumbai doesn't have any trademark or authority over. You know, anyone in the city can engage with their built environment similarly. Think about what the original colors of the building may have been like, what the life of the building has been like. You know, these are all like creative queries that you can engage with. You don't have to be an architect. You don't have to have any technical photography skills. You just need to be able to observe what is around you. And I think it's documentation, this very, very technical process of documentation that opens up these other creative avenues, not just for us, but for all the people that we're putting our work out there for. This is a map of the Victorian Gothic and Art Deco ensembles, which became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2018. All the buildings dotted in the red are Art Deco, and as a part of the ensemble, they enjoy certain protections. Many of you may know about the Coastal Road project that's taking place in Bombay at the moment, which is going to connect marine lines in the south all the way to Kandivali in the western suburbs. Now, this infrastructural project is actually eating into the entire promenade that extends up to Chowpatty Beach. And anyone who's even familiar with Bombay cinema knows that this stretch is the most enduring image of Bombay. You know, any film that is situated in Bombay, these are the first images that you see on screen. It's something that you immediately identify with the city of Bombay. And unfortunately, it's under threat because of this developmental project. But since Marine Drive enjoys protection under the UNESCO inscription, this developmental project was compelled to shift by a few feet, and it starts a little ahead. And Marine Drive and the Art Deco buildings along that stretch were protected because of the UNESCO nomination. And now I think that is the power of documentation. Through documentation, the stakeholders that were involved in this nomination were able to bring attention to these living heritage structures and advocate for their protection. But having said that, Art Deco in Bombay goes much beyond the Victorian Gothic and Art Deco ensemble. In fact, our documentation has proven that there is a significantly larger collection of Art Deco buildings in the northern part of the city, the less glamorous part of the city, which you don't see in films, as compared to South Bombay, especially in the neighborhoods of Dadar and Matunga. As I was saying earlier, the thrust of the claim about the density of Bombay's Art Deco is recognizing that the style percolates much beyond the island city. It may have started in Oval Maidan for those familiar with Bombay's history of reclamation. Oval Maidan was the first Art Deco district in the city, but through our detailed documentation, we have found that we were able to spot Deco across the city's north and south axis. So on this map, you can see it starts in Kolaba, there's Oval Maidan, Marine Drive. Kambala Hill has a lot of Art Deco style bungalows. Dadar and Matunga, incidentally, are one of the first planned suburbs in Bombay, which also came up in the 1930s. And the Art Deco style was the chosen style for the low-rise apartments that came up in the city at the time, which was essentially the answer to the crisis of space in the city, because of course, Bombay's always had a problem of population explosion, because it's attracted so many people for various opportunities since its inception. Now, we've discovered that Art Deco is an extremely versatile form. You will see imageries of almost every major practiced faith in Bombay represented through the Art Deco style. We've spotted the lotus, the swastik, the Hamza sign, the crescent moon, or even Parsi Farohas represented in the Art Deco style. We've also been able to identify material that little was known about before. For example, color creep, which is a colored concrete, which became famous in the 1930s and 40s. And through our documentation and adjacent research, which our documentation led us to, we were able to discover technical details like this. Documentation has also allowed us to explore interesting threads of urban histories of the development of neighborhoods. So for example, we've spotted Art Deco across typologies as well. Of course, they're apartment buildings, but they're also public buildings, they're insurance buildings, they're banks, there are high schools. The Ismail Beg Muhammad High School in Muhammad Ali Road is in a beautiful Art Deco style. There's Don Bosco High School in Matunga. There are several Parsi Agyaris in the Art Deco style, and hospitals. Breach Candy Hospital, which some of you may know, was where Amitabh Bachchan was famously admitted when during his coolie accident. That's an Art Deco hospital. So through architecture, I think we can begin to talk about the city's urban culture. Our focus isn't simply on architecture, but the various queries that it sort of leads us to. It leads us to talk about the city's urban culture, its cosmopolitanism, how an infrastructural development like the reclamation or the suburban development in Matunga, for instance, has impacted the city's culture. Documentation forms the basis of several of those adjacent research queries. You may discover a factoid while you're doing documentation, while you're speaking to somebody in a certain neighborhood that you're documenting, and something from their personal narrative or some factoid that they might know which you're not aware of will lead you to larger explorations. So let me go into the actual technical process of how we go about doing our documentation. The first half, as I said, was field work. And under field work, the first thing we do is recceing the neighborhood. Now, the thrust of the exercise here is not simply to identify which ones are the Art Deco built forms in a certain neighborhood, but to also understand the formations of, say, communities and the socio-cultural context in which a certain neighborhood emerged in. And to do this, very often we will find a resource in a neighborhood, an old-time resident, for instance, who becomes our point of contact, and their oral histories become very important for our documentation for any given neighborhood. In our experience, people have been extremely forthcoming. In fact, there was a lady in Juhu East who wrote to us recently about her mother, who spent most of her life in an Art Deco bungalow, which is now slated for redevelopment. But her mother's now in her 90s, and this is essentially a very, very private family. But she reached out to us, and she wanted her mother's oral history to be recorded. So it isn't just about the tangible built form, but it's also associated and linked so intrinsically with people's familial histories and their experience of the city itself. The next step is to create a base map with a zone boundary. The map that you see on your screen is a zoomed out Google map of what we have identified, of a neighborhood we've identified within Matunga. The red dots that you see on your screen is the outer boundary within which the documentation for this zone will take place. And as the process moves forward, this map becomes more detailed and is layered with more information. For the purpose of this presentation, I'll take you through how this map will evolve. We've identified this as Zone 3A in Matunga. That's the name given to this zone. Now, the same map that you saw in the previous slide has been populated with more detail. Zone 3A in this instance has been broken up into blocks. The white lines that you see on this map, these are the streets in this block, which in this zone, which separate the blocks that we have identified. And each block is given a unique reference number so that it can be identified. Now, all the blocks, the number of buildings in each block is identified. And once that staggering volume of work we've gone through, then from those, all of those buildings, we identify which ones are the Art Deco buildings. So this map, once we've done that exercise, this map begins to look like the map that you see on your right. So at the end of the documentation work, the Art Deco buildings in each block is identified with a different color. And the map that you see on the right, the Art Deco buildings are in the dark gray. Now, like I said, this is a staggering volume of work. A single zone like this, like Matunga Zone 3A, has 273 buildings in total. And this is only one zone that we've covered in Matunga. So it's a lot. It's extremely strenuous and time-consuming work, as you can probably infer from what I've been saying. Finally, after all that field work, we get down to actually doing the photo documentation. But even before that, there is one more step, which is we work on a survey form, it works like a checklist almost. When you go out to do any kind of photo documentation, you carry this with you. And if you see anything that's on that list, you make sure that you photograph it and it's ticked off that list. So what you see on your screen is an example of such a survey form. It has shots to be taken and key features that you should look out for when you're documenting a certain building. Here are a few examples of details that we've captured because we had the survey form handy to cross-check with. On the left, you can see Sita Sadan in Mahin with the beautiful deco grill. Now, if you're passing, you may pass by this gate every day and not notice it. So we made it a point that it was documented. On the right is Ratan Manor. This is the metal lettering on Ratan Manor in Kolaba. And you can see that this is a very close shot. If you see this building from a distance, you won't be able to spot this lettering because it's obscured by a tree. So you really have to pay close attention when you're documenting, because otherwise this beautiful metal lettering would be missed. Here again on the left, you see Dreamland in Chembur and these beautiful concrete grills on the building. Now, this is a decrepit building. It hasn't been lived in for several years. And again, these features would be very easy to miss if we didn't have a checklist to go with. On the right is the Roji's Sojpal building in Dadar. This building is on a very busy intersection. And if you're crossing the road, chances are you're not looking up to see what buildings around you are looking like. So again, it's important to pay close attention to the features that might come through in any Art Deco building you're documenting. The pattern on this railing, the concrete railing, for instance, the inverted triangle pattern is what we call chevron. It's a very popular Art Deco motif that is popular across the world. It's not just a Bombay Art Deco motif. Now, on the top left is Prakash. This is a sunburst in Prakash Dadar, which again is a very popular deco motif. And below that is a very, very intricate bas relief panel on the Cotton Exchange building in Kalba Devi, which details the process of producing cotton. And many of you might know cotton was the sinew of trade in Bombay, and it's one of the commodities that made Bombay such an important port of trade. On the right is Anilkunj in Matunga. And there's a depiction of the lotus. Like I said, there are several expressions of various kinds of faiths and cultural clues that you can see in Bombay's deco. So there's a depiction of the lotus. Some might even interpret the lines that are emerging from the lotus as the sunburst. Again, this is just an unassuming residential building that you can pass by and miss completely. But our documentation ensures that this detail is documented. Next, let's shift gears to the second part of the documentation process, which is what we do after the initial photographing has been completed. As I've mentioned before, a lot of work is produced when you're out in the field, and a single neighborhood can produce as many as 1,500 photographs. Now, each of these photographs needs to be processed, and they're placed in their respective folders based on the unique reference number that has been given to each block. We have a naming convention that captures the reference number and the name of the building. So if you look at bullet point number 4, let's say you need to label a building called Noor Mahal in Matunga's zone 3A. So that would become 3A, which is a zone number. MC is the block name. The building number is 05, and the building name finally is Noor Mahal. So that becomes 3A underscore MC underscore 05 underscore Noor Mahal, which is, and all individual buildings are named similarly so that they're easy to look for when once we've cataloged. And while naming the images correctly is one facet of the cataloging work, it needs to be done alongside accurate metadata entries. And this is a necessary step that allows photographs to be located based on keyword searches. Like they can be filtered by, say, elements, features, the GPS location of the building. So that's also an important thing to add when you're cataloging. This is just a flow chart of the process that I described earlier. As you can see, it begins with the zone number, then the block name is added, and then all the Art Deco buildings are put into a singular folder, and they're within that folder that divided based on the naming convention. And through those photographs, we shortlist the ones that need to be processed and need to be put out there for a larger public to appreciate. The next step is to create documentation panels. Now, this is done for each individual building. These panels capture important information about the building, like the year of construction, the architect, the GPS coordinates, etc. It also contains images of some deco details along with a brief architectural description. You may notice the two maps on the top left. This is the key plan, which is a zoomed out view of the region, of the neighborhood, and the location plan, which situates the specific property that the panel is for within the larger context of the area. So for instance, if there is a famous cross section near the property, then you know vis-a-vis that cross section where the property that you are assessing lies in that context. These panels are reviewed by an architect and then independently approved by a senior architect on the team. This plan that you see on your screen is for Aurora Theatres in Matunga, which again came up in the late 1930s and is an extremely popular theatre. I'm not sure what its fate is at the moment. It hasn't screened a film in a couple of months. This is another example of a documentation panel. This is for Lakshmi Niwas in Shivaji Park. I'll just linger here for a couple of seconds so you can take a look. Now, as I said, any documentation process is, of course, you're going to be encountering challenges, and this is an extremely elaborate process. So any glitch here or there, it can derail the whole exercise. The first thing is Bombay's monsoons. I mean, even the uninitiated, I'm sure, is familiar with the rains we experience in the city. Now, for several months in the year, there is actually no documentation at all because of the rains. And we are a very small team. We typically work with architectural interns who help us out with our documentation work. So our recruitment also has to align with when it's raining in Bombay, and it's raining very often in Bombay. So I think net, I think only December through March is when the bulk of our documentation work takes place. We also require the consent and cooperation of the residents to be able to document their buildings. In most cases, like I said, they are extremely forthcoming. They are proud that their building is being showcased. They'll reach out to us and request that their building be documented or their neighborhood be documented. But in some instances, like in Matunga, for instance, our documentation team has met with some resistance. Residents might be suspicious that you're coming because you're assessing the area for redevelopment. They might be suspicious that you're coming from the government and things like that. So it demands a lot of, those situations demand a lot of time and persistence and persuasion to, reassure the resident that you're only there to be able to document the building and the importance of this exercise. And it requires people skills and some humor at times to get through and get access. Lighting is very important for documentation. You need to choose a certain time of day to photograph a building vis-a-vis its orientation to the sun. So you don't get any shadows and you get a clear shot when you're documenting a certain building. And the ongoing pandemic, of course, nobody is a stranger to the impact that it's had on lives. For 2 years, we had no documentation work at all. There was no field work. We were lucky to have carried out extensive work before the lockdown and also process it in the cloud system when we moved to a work from home arrangement. So we had material rolling to put out there and showcase in our inventory, even when the world was locked down. It's only this year that our documentation work has resumed with greater force. Like I said, the work is ongoing. As of September 2022, we have surveyed over 2,000 buildings in Bombay and found 877 of these to be Art Deco. That's more than 40%. And this has taken several man hours, for lack of a better word, since we began in 2016. And we've never done the math, but I suppose it's worth looking into how many people and how many hours went into the number that we've arrived at today. And I just want to talk a little bit about the impact of this documentation. Very often we have people writing to us in our comment section with personal anecdotes, details about buildings that we may have overlooked, or any kind of new information that may come to light. So these are just a few examples. I hope you can read some of these comments. Asabri on our Instagram post for Raut House wrote in saying, "I did not know that the building was called Raut House. My late father was into professional Marathi theatre as a personal hobby, and his theatre guru Nandakumar Raut used to stay on the 3rd floor of that building. Nandakumar Raut ran a theatre company called Lalit Kala Sadhana with a group of young, well-known theatre professionals, of which my father was a part of, along with the famous Marathi playwright Suresh Khare, character artist Datta Mane, production and set designer Baba Parsekar, and many more. Your picture brought back fond memories of my childhood." Anuradha Shah writes about Champak, which is a stunning Art Deco building, and it has these blue highlights that make the Art Deco motif sort of pop on the facade. She writes, "The architect of Champak was N.H. Gupte. The building design was appreciated so much that an identical building was built and stands opposite Shivaji Park Gymkhana. It's called Prabhav Vijay. Also, there's one more similar in design on MB Raut Road. This one is changed a bit after restoration." But that's also important information for us, because the facades of these buildings change so much over time that there's really no way to sort of authenticate what it may have looked like in its original form. So this kind of information is also very useful for us. This is Taj Manzil in Muhammad Ali Road. Someone wrote in saying, "I look back at Taj Manzil with great fondness, home of my childhood best friend Rashida Vahanvati and a multitude of cousins. Paradise for any only child. I never knew then that it was an Art Deco building, and I'm happy to learn of its origins. Also delighted to know about Karani Kaka, a Baba Bora bond that continued with us. Karani Kaka is the architect of this building, and we actually don't have his formal name. This is just what the residents of this building knew him by. And Taj Manzil, incidentally, the Vahanvati family we have been in touch with, and the family occupies the entire building to date. So this is still a family-owned building which has been occupied for decades. And their oral histories became extremely important for our documentation work. And some of the excerpts from some of these oral histories were also put out when we showcased this building on our social media. And the family wrote to us, and they were extremely thrilled and very touched that their building was showcased in such a manner and was getting such a wonderful response from people. So those are just some of our experiences. And on that note, I think I can bring my session to a close. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, you can write to us at info@artdecomumbai.in. You can also take a look at our website and see the work that we've been doing. And these are our social media handles that are you can see on your screen. And those are also what you can use to write to us if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, over here we are all clapping. I don't know if you guys can hear it or not. Thank you. So Hasini, that was such a meticulous process of documentation. Wow. I mean, I really didn't know the back end of your project. I'm glad we connected like this. And I think for both the projects, I'm just realizing that it's exciting that we're seeing it on big screen. Because so many details and so many nuances are coming out, which I don't think I've experienced in the last 2 years on my laptop screen, 14-inch, 13-inch. So I think, thank you. Yeah, thank you for joining us at this hour, actually. I have questions, but I don't want to hog the light. So over to the participants, if anybody wants to start.
Okay, as I have understood, this whole project of documenting Art Deco buildings in Mumbai started from a social media group or a post. So that's a very good start. And then how did it get funded? Because all this takes a lot of money, to send volunteers out, and volunteers can only do so much. But after that, you need a lot of funding. So are you funded? Have people supported you guys?
So we're a not-for-profit trust, and this is a very good question because we are constantly on the lookout for fundraisers. We're constantly in conversation, and now the government has allowed heritage to be part of CSR. So we're hoping to also get some kind of funding through that avenue. But this is, I mean, there's always a dearth of funds, and this is, as you're saying, an expensive process that is difficult for us to sustain. So we started with the social media handle, and so far we've experienced. I'm sorry. So far we've experienced a lot of goodwill. So we've been running on donations, but that has been the model so far, and we're hoping to get more extensive donations and funding. We're on our own, so to speak, and hoping that money will show up.
Yeah, so my question was more like you started with Bombay, but I'm sure there were many things that must have led you to understand that this is all over India. So what did you kind of do to kind of contain your research and say, this is it? I mean, did threads lead you, like some architect who's also designed in other parts of India? Because I've seen a lot in Gujarat also, so.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, for now, our focus is on Bombay, and we've recently also started a small chapter in Pune, which is slowly picking pace. And we've started our documentation work in Pune. It's been nearly 2 years now, and we're slowly rolling all that material out. But as you're saying, I mean, there is an impression that Art Deco is this sort of elite architectural form that exists only in these large metropolitan cities. So Calcutta, Delhi, Bombay, these are the spots for Art Deco, but it actually percolates across India. For instance, W.M. Namjoshi is the interior designer who made Liberty Cinema in Bombay, but he's done upwards of 20 cinemas across India as well. He's done Golcha Cinema in Delhi. So you're absolutely right. Art Deco percolates beyond the borders of Bombay. But because, as I described, the scale of the work is so massive that it was important for us to delimit and start somewhere. But hopefully, it also leads to further engagement and awareness about the style existing in several other parts of the country. And there are people doing good work. There are these handles as Deco in Delhi, who has meticulously been documenting Art Deco structures in Delhi. There's work happening in Hyderabad. There's work happening in Calcutta. But the scale, of course, keeps varying. But you're absolutely right. There's Art Deco across.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to pitch in with a question here. I think I'm just itching to ask both of you this because I think both of you have showed us very expansive work, right? And I think what will help most of us who are workshopping today is to think through your understanding. How do you think about your user base, or who is your user base? How are they reaching out to you? Because somewhere there was a sort of a deliberate attempt in curating these two very contrasting presentations, right? One, Samir, where you have gone around scouting for material from people's family collections. So the copyright issues, and can you actually digitize them? How did you digitize them or document them? To Suhasini, what you are looking at is ultimately public information. At the end of the day, the buildings are out there. So
Yeah.
while you might take their consent, the material is accessible to all, can be made accessible to all. So in that case, how do you both engage with users of your archives before the building of the project and now once the projects are built?
Samir, why don't you go take that first?
Regarding how do you go about it, the question is that, let me give a brief example. At the end of this month, we are holding an exhibition on an individual, and it's basically about his very family archives. So it is an individual whose family is interested in display of information related to that particular person, who was a calligrapher, who was a poet. So in the end, it's again always about the family and how far are they willing to share. Even after having worked almost on it for a decade with my own family, I'm sure that I've not seen all the documents, because these are legal documents, and particularly in our case, it was a family of landowning family. So there are civil suits against each other. So there are some documents that are never that can never be made. I mean, even if I'm sort of a part of that very family, there are certain documents that I've never been able to see or source out. The question is, have I been able to document all of them? We had a website which was functional till a couple of years back, wherein many of these documents, because at the end of the day, mostly these are manuscripts, were available as PDF. Because the idea is that that should be available to a larger body of scholars who deal with this language, scholars who are basically working in this particular field, which is one of religious knowledge, Islamic religious knowledge, secondly about art, calligraphy, etc., etc. So that was a sort of a website that was functional till almost 2019, but then in 2019, many things went haywire in Kashmir, so that website is gone. But over a period of time, what I would say is that we have been able to create a certain body of scholars, primarily in my case, who are able to access these documents. Now, is it something that's been also shared with the wider public? To be honest, no. Beyond the fact that there were certain documents that were available as a PDF on a website. Mostly, there is a certain amount of reluctance because many of these works are polemical works targeting each other. So there is a certain amount of sense of apprehension about these documents being in the public domain. There are certain issues within the family itself, lingering civil suits, wherein they don't want something to be a part of the public domain, which might be used against them still. So there is that amount of reluctance on one part. But then again, I mean, the most that I've been able to do personally is that you are able to create a certain awareness about the set of material that is available with certain families. And these are a couple of families, not just one family. I started with my own family, but now we have identified around 10, 12 different families within Srinagar cities, linked but different families. So you have an awareness about the fact that there are these families and they have this huge archival information available dealing with such subjects, and people have been able to gain access primarily because of what we have done so far. So I'd say on a larger scale, there are some documents that we have been able to share, but not all of them. There's an issue of copyright. There's an issue of, again, certain sensitivities associated with these documents, but mostly it is restricted access even at the end of the day.
Thank you, Samir. Suhasini?
Yeah, our experience would be slightly less complicated than what Samir has to encounter, because as you said, at the end of it, this is open to the public. It's public. I mean, the facades that you see on Marine Drive or on Oval Maidan, these are all privately owned buildings, but Marine Drive belongs to everyone in Bombay. You know, you're promenading on this, I mean, by the sea, and you're looking at these Art Deco structures. So even if they are privately owned, but at the end of it, it's an enduring sort of Bombay experience that belongs to everyone in a certain sense. And of course, so that's on the point of being able to put out images or say information about any facade's structure, which is open to the public. And also, we've been quite lucky. We've garnered certain goodwill, and people are extremely forthcoming, like I said, about their oral histories, about their family histories. They want this information to be put out there, because there is, in Bombay, I found that there is a curious sense of ownership. This is people feel like the city belongs to them. There is a certain sense of that kind of ownership. So in our experience, at least, people have been very forthcoming and haven't had as many reservations about putting certain details about how long they've lived in the building, for instance, or who owned the building, who they bought the building from, things like that. So information like that, we haven't found very challenging to put out there. And of course, our objective from the get-go is our research should have certain kinds of academic rigor. I mean, we think of ourselves as serious, for lack of a better word, but at the same time, it's important for everything that we're documenting, everything that we're working on, to be accessible. I mean, what is the point of this entire exercise if that information isn't put out there? We're just a team of 4 people. What are we going to do with all this wealth of information that we're sort of curating and digging up? So that's been a part of our objective. So of course, our website has the inventory map that I showed you, which is kind of user friendly. You can filter that map based on the location of a building, based on neighborhoods, based on elements of any Art Deco elements that you want to see on a certain building. So using that inventory, you can lead yourselves on a guided tour of the city's Art Deco. So that's one instance. And we have embraced social media, and social media has embraced us. Our Instagram, we have a lot of young people who follow us on Instagram and very, very enthusiastically write into us. On Facebook, also, it's the same case. On Facebook, we have a slightly older demographic, but again, a highly engaged audience. And I think it's also useful because a lot of our material is visual. So the engagement changes accordingly. In fact, we've had people someone from Kolhapur, from Solapur might write to us in the comments, and they use a colloquial Marathi slang to sort of talk about how stunning a stairwell or a building looks. Somebody wrote to us saying "rap chick," which is the kind of engagement that we've been experiencing, and we've seen that it works. So in that sense, we've been quite lucky in terms of putting it out there for the user to engage with.
I hope it's safe to say that you are going with the trend. So as much as you are serious and academic and diligent, you are going with the trend. So I have one more question for you, Samir, and hopefully by that time, if anybody in the audience, audience wants to add to the question. Samir, I'm very curious about the whole idea of, access because of language, but also in terms of your access to other histories. So while I was very fascinated that the project is very rooted in Kashmir, Kashmiri Muslims must have gone to other places. So did you have troubles trying to connect with them and find more material and fill up the gaps that you might have identified? And then coming back to language itself being the logic of access here, because not all of us can read this, and then the material is flowing in different directions, the images that you showed us. So I'm very curious, does it become a very limited project or in itself without knowing, unconsciously, basically?
Actually, no. There has always been a wide Kashmiri diaspora. It's been located in Punjab, both Indian part of the Punjab and Pakistani part of the Punjab, now mostly Lahore. Kashmiri diaspora, which was in Awadh. And again, individuals who have been residing in Najaf, which is in Iraq, Iran. So there has always been these exchanges between Kashmir, intellectual exchanges, cultural exchanges happening between Kashmir and the region beyond South Asia. And wherever these exchanges have happened, they have left their traces. As I try to show in one of the documents, there are these letters which are being written by pilgrims who have gone to Hajj or who have gone to Iraq, and some of them have even settled down there. And then there are these continuous letters which have been written between the families till a certain period of time. till the sort of the creation of the modern nation state in 47. And these do form important linkages about how families were. I've been able to talk to many Kashmiri families who've settled in Awadh, which is UP, and even if they don't have a connection with Kashmir, they do have that memory that at a certain point of time our family members came and these were the reasons why they migrated here, and this is how we started our life here. Similar is the case in Lahore. So overall, I would say that there is enough archival material available, enough textual material available, and people still have memories of wherein Kashmir gets connected to a broader geography outside of Kashmir. Coming back to the question of script or language, most of these documents are in Persian. That's true. I mean, you need to have a certain working knowledge of Persian, but then again, that's not an issue these days. These are not easily user-friendly for a great amount of people, even in Kashmir, because they don't know how to read Persian. Persian was a sort of official language till the mid-late part of the 19th century, but there are still many people in Kashmir. My parents, my mother at least, who is well versed with Persian. So there are these people who are well versed with the language. And again, as a script, Nasalat is a part of the Muslim broader culture. It's a script that in which Urdu is also written. And even if Persian is not taught, there is a certain amount of similarity between the language that is Urdu and the language that is Persian in terms of our literature, etc. So there are these flowing connections between these different scripts and languages, which are still intact to a certain degree. So I would say you need just to put a certain amount of rigor in your work. That's it. Otherwise, it's not a sort of an impossible task to get an understanding of what's written there. But yes, there are certain, and especially in this family, there are certain documents which are written in highly ornate Persian. And that's Persian which even many modern Persian speakers would find rather impossible to understand. The flow of the language is such, the grammar is such, it makes certain issues in getting a certain understanding of what's being basically said. So yes, but then I think you do manage here and there, somehow you manage. It's just like an access to a building. You do get it. At the end of the day, somehow you manage it.
You plan to turn this into an archive. That's where I'm going with this. Because I think when you are researching with it, I understand that you have found help around you to understand or work with it. But will this be accessible to more people than the primary group of scholars?
Yeah, that's why when we started the website, that was an issue. But then I've also found out that this is just one family. There's so many multiple families with multiple traditions. And generally, over a period of time, we have been able to, at least people are sort of interested in their families. That's why I'm saying we are having this exhibition at the end of this month, which is about one person in the larger context of his family and Kashmir. How do they sort of correlate? How do they connect? What is this person all about and what is this family all about? So it is there, but then these are many physical objects. These are texts, these are histories, right? But then these are also physical objects. The possibility to create them at a certain space and put them on a display is something that would appeal to a younger generation far more than the idea of having a book which speaks about it. So these are some things that, ideally should happen. But again, the question is, if there is a dispersed collection, you need how many and when and where do they agree to sort of curate an exhibition to sort of display it. But luckily, there's one single exhibition that we'll be having at the end of this month. So that's a start, I would say.
That's wonderful. I wish we all could have come to that exhibition, but we look forward to images. Tanvi has a question for you, Suhasini. I'm jumping to the questions. Outside of oral histories, how do you research further about these structures? And what advice would you give to someone starting out in archiving? What are the basic roles that a project needs in the beginning?
That's a good question, Tanvi. Actually, we're not always lucky to have oral histories for a certain building or a neighborhood. We have access to the JJ School of Architecture actually provided us with archival prints of the Journal of Indian Institute of Architects, which was active, I think it's active to date, which has a lot of detail about new building developments that were happening in the 30s and 40s. They have architects writing about, opinion pieces about what they think Bombay should look like as a metropolitan city. So those journals give us a lot of insight into the sort of discourse that is shaping the city's infrastructure at the time. We also have access to the Times of India archives. In fact, when the reclamation was taking place, and when in the 40s, when Marine Drive was being constructed, the Times of India carried an entire supplement which had details of all the, for Oval Maidan, there are 18 Art Deco buildings along that stretch. And the Times of India carried details about all of those 18 buildings, as to what material was being used, who the owners were, how much the original plot was purchased for. So that has been extremely useful. And in general, I mean, I think when you're starting out archiving, I would say it's going to be extremely strenuous and sort of discouraging, perhaps at the beginning, because again, there may be like lacunae in the archive, and you keep feeling like you're hitting a hard stop, hitting a wall. But I guess the idea that we have also learned over time is to go around the question. If there is, I mean, I think we need to start looking at a certain archival question or a certain question of documentation as, don't think of it as something that cannot be answered. Think of ways in which you can go around that question. See if you can, if oral histories aren't working out, for instance, is there some clue in a classified advertisement in an old newspaper, for instance? So I think the idea is to keep at it till you find a different way of asking that question. So that's something that's, it's easier said than done, but I think that would be something that you might want to keep in mind. So I hope that answers your question.
And Suhasini, thank you for elaborating on that. And I think I'll just add for Tanvi's information, because Tanvi, Neha, and Mr. Buddha, who's joined us from Moirana, they were not with us through the workshop. So for three of you, if it's helpful, we have certain resources on Curating for Culture YouTube channel in terms of archiving projects and initiation into certain processes. If it is helpful in any way, you want to fall back onto such material. Anybody else? Any other questions from this online team, from the offline team? Oh, yes.
Yeah, I just had a question for both the presenters. So, okay. Yeah, I just had a quick question for both the presenters. Did your work lead to the labor that was involved in terms of making, let's say, deco or the calligraphy and so on? What sort of issues with respect to, like, I really like the fact that the Quran was attributed to the writer who wrote, and that's something even we find very difficult with respect to our, like when we work with palm leaf manuscripts, we just don't know who has written it. And in that sense, there is so much of labor invisibilization that happens due to a lot of caste, class, religion kind of issues that we have. So I'm just kind of curious in terms of how the archives are kind of responding to the labor that built it, especially like Art Deco would have had so much of Bahujan labor in it, and similarly to the calligraphy and so on. Like, how do those, and also maybe there are specific castes that do the art, right? So how are they doing now, or how do they interact with your archive, or how do they get involved in the project, and like that. Maybe they also do a PhD on this. So I'm just kind of curious as how to get them on board as well, and they don't get left out of it.
Sameer, do you want to take that first?
That's rather interesting, because that's what's happening always. In case of the manuscripts, I would say, yes, we have the primary authorship, which is about the calligrapher, who is the calligrapher. But then the paper doesn't start with the calligrapher. It's someone who's basically processing your rag, etc., at a certain different place and manufacturing it into paper. And you have no idea about who that person is, beyond the fact that you broadly know that there is a certain area within Srinagar wherein paper used to be manufactured. There's a certain area wherein leather would be worked, because these are leather embossed, these manuscripts are embossed within the leather cover. And who are the people who are going to work with leather? Then similar the question is in terms of sourcing of material, the color and the pigment, etc. So I would say more or less there's not been much work that's been done on it to a certain degree beyond the sort of a broad categorization wherein you generally associate a certain group or a certain area with a certain craft. But what is important is that at least in case of Kashmir, craft as a tradition is a living tradition. Maybe not all the crafts are still practiced there, but there are many crafts which are still continuing to be a part of our living tradition. And families who have been historically involved with a certain particular craft are still working within that craft. Now, do they get the same sense of uh, appreciation for a product which in the end is a manuscript? I would say not all of them do. Again, in terms of the illumination, the Naqashi, generally you don't know who has done it. But overall, I would say as a society, we find that there are many people who are from these deprived groups who are making their voices felt because of the work they're doing presently, not because of what their ancestors had done in the past. So yes, there is that missing gap between who all were there responsible for the production of a certain craft. In the end, what we get to know is only about those learned elite classes who give their name to the bill to that one end product. I mean, it's something similar to a building. At the most, you might get the name of the head mason who was responsible for construction of a certain building, but the labor, where did that labor force come? Was it ruler? Was it from the city itself? How were they being sort of, how were they working in a certain condition? You hardly have any information available to a large degree. I mean, it's a sort of, these products are products of a semi-feudal society. We need to accept it.
Yeah, I would agree with Sameer. I think we've come to realize that Art Deco is perhaps a style adopted by the emerging middle classes at the time. And of course, we have some information about the architects or the sculptors who invariably were upper caste men. Although they were Indian, there is an impression that Art Deco was a style commissioned by the colonial officers or by the British, but invariably they were actually commissioned and patronized by Indian owners, Indian architects, Indian sculptors. But having said that, there is a gap in the archive about the manual labor that's involved in constructing these apartment buildings. And in all likelihood, the labor that went into creating these apartments were not the ones occupying these apartments. They were probably occupying the sort of working class chawls that are emerging as part of the Bombay Improvement Trust exercise to create more living spaces in the city. So it might be useful to look at work practices and migratory practices in those chawl settlements, which perhaps have a clue as to the labor that was going into constructing these Art Deco structures. So of course, this is a gap that needs to be addressed, and there is a gap in the archive as to the work that went into constructing the structures. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I think I'm just thinking aloud with your responses to that question, that this is what also justifies the need for more archiving or live archiving, so that what seems to have become the outcome of the past mistakes doesn't repeat itself, if I put it like that, simply put. So we now at least don't miss out who builds our buildings or who's written our scriptures, or the crafts especially, who's making them. And so how do we document crafts, or how do we document building making? And these are some of the things that we talk a lot about, especially in the architectural, I can't say architectural education, but architectural education where some people are interested in research. So we've done this both in heritage and in architecture, where should we start doing it now before it's too late for what it's left of. So, anyone else? Any questions?
Yeah, the reason I kind of brought that up was because I was at this remote. Yeah, the reason I kind of brought that up was because I was at this remote architectural wonder near Hyderabad, and then I saw a few people manning it, and then it was pretty clear, because the way in which the caste structures and class structures are worked, that it was probably the people manning the lawn and kind of repairing the work in that remote part of Hyderabad, his grandmother and their grandparents would have probably really built it. So I kind of started asking those questions, and they had their oral histories in terms of their grandparents handing down construction histories of that particular place itself. So it's very likely that the same people who are coming to repair this Art Deco building would probably have oral histories with their grandparents who would have probably constructed it. So those histories have actually remained intact because mobilization. Uh, the thing is that because the class mobility and job mobility is so hard when you are in an oppressed class situation, you would probably be more likely to get a lot more oral histories because the mobility would have unlikely to have happened. So we could probably retrace and construct those archives, and that old grandmother who exists nearby in that working class chawl could probably actually walk by and say, hey, I did this repair work, or I constructed this, or I heard this story. And they would have even inhabited there for a couple of months as long as it got built and so on. So I was just like, yeah, it is something that could be taken up. And I did this once and it worked. So yeah.
Yeah,
If I could just
yes,
sort of for a
please.
second
Yeah.
intervene, if it's okay.
Yes, yes, please.
There was a picture that I think I shared where there is this family, and at the back and at the front, you have basically the people who are serving the family itself. So while I was going through this image with the members of the family, they were able to identify their ancestors in the sense, this is my great grandfather, his name was this, and more or less I got the name of all the people who are the members of that particular family. But once we come to the persons who are working for them, servants per se, they were just dismissed with a wave of hand. ये हमारे यहाँ पे काम करते थे. Who are they? I mean, there was no conscious effort even to sort of accept the fact that they exist. They were just sort of a decoration on a picture, larger image wherein you are trying to portray your path. But then the question was that in this case, the people, the way this society was working, the people who are working for this particular family, their descendants still live in the same area. So the next question would be, why don't you take the same set of pictures and just approach them and see how they respond to the same anonymity which is associated with their ancestors? But I mean, I don't know how it works, this sort of class difference between different areas, but at least in Srinagar, these people, even if their forefathers were working for a certain family, today they are engineers and doctors. So there is a certain sense of shame associated in the new generation with the work that they were doing in the past. It's work. I mean, you're working, I'm working, they were working. Also, there should ideally not be that sense of shaming with it. But because of the feudal nature of our societies and the mentalities that we have inherited, and the way they're still being used to oppress some of them, even in spite of the fact that they have progressed in life. So there was a reluctance to sort of identify members of their own family. So this is something that happens, but then it's not always a question. You can't sort of get an answer at the end of days. At certain points you may, but that's also another point wherein the other element in this relation is also not so keen and forthcoming about accepting who they are or who their ancestors were within a certain picture. In the end, it's just a picture.
Yeah, that's what even I was going to remark, that I don't know if it's different for crafts and construction. I think that's what's right now going on in my head, because when we have tried visiting craft settlements, even if the communities have moved on, they have sort of embraced the fact that, okay, we used to do such a craft, but now we have moved on and become, let's say, cab drivers or any other kind of profession. But construction is very interesting in itself, because I think that's where we feel belittled. If I'm trying to speak for somebody else, and that's itself so wrong. So Asini, if you all had any experiences with any kind of construction workers, or tried anything on this?
We've had. I mean, I think it's an interesting suggestion. I'm not sure what we would encounter in a city like Bombay, vis-a-vis. I mean, say somebody who's coming in to do repair work in a certain building. I'm not sure what we would encounter in terms of their familial history in the city, because Bombay famously has a migratory practice that's constantly in transition. It's a city constantly in transit. So I'm not sure if we would be able to trace familial history in that sense. But in terms of working with construction workers, we worked on the restoration of this building on Oval Maidan. It's called Swastik Court. And through that restoration, we worked with a Mahara contract. It was a Mahara appointed contractor, but eventually he worked privately. And so while speaking with him, we learned that he came into the profession because his father was also a mistri, and he had been working in the city already for say 30 years, and his father would have worked for say 60, 70 odd years. So again, I mean, those kinds of histories perhaps you can unearth in terms of how they were engaged with the BMC, for instance, or other sort of formal structures. But I'm not sure if occupationally it passes on as we understand caste practices do. I'm not sure if that is always the case in Bombay.
Very, very important point, right? Bombay keeps moving and changing, and so that must be the difference between crafts, because they are ancestrally usually passed down, versus construction, which is a forced practice, if I put it like that. But I am also forced over here to at least bring out one very recent experience, because while we were making the book for Biome, Biome Architects is an institution in itself on ecological architecture. And because this was a live documentation exercise in Bangalore through an office and their people. So we reached out to masons, we reached out to different contractors, masons, carpenters, plumbing agents. And it was very interesting over there also who spoke and who didn't, and who spoke in front of whom and who didn't speak in front of them. And both in terms of gender also. So we couldn't get the woman to talk. For her, it was more like, it's taking my time off, and will I talk in front of all these men? Because at the end of the day, me and her were the only two women on the site. And the second was even between the masons and the certain hierarchies that they might have, one person choosing to speak over the other because the narrative should be a certain way. So even though, in the live practice, we're sensing it, that authorship itself between them is also a politics in itself. But that's not to say we should not be doing it. It's just that it's making it more interesting and worthy. Yes, Yamini, over to you. And maybe this will be the last question.
No, I mean, I just was responding to this discussion on cities and, documenting invisible work. And from the example which Srinidhi gave, I think different cities, as Suhasini was also pointing out, different cities probably have different characteristic to it. This example of Hyderabad and people around being able to speak about whether in terms of labor is because I work on the city as well. I think it's very characteristic of a kind of city that Hyderabad is. It wouldn't be the same, say, for example, in Srinagar or in Bombay. And hence, maybe the archiving practices for these spaces itself will be very, very different, I would say. Because when we want to, maybe we'll have to look at other places for understanding the invisible labor questions, and not necessarily around. In Hyderabad, this method definitely works. But in other places, maybe I don't know the answers, but maybe the search has to be in other ways because these spaces call for different practices itself. Even though it might be the same architecture being or a craft in these locations being documented, the process cannot be replicated so easily. Often, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I mean, it's about seeing if you can ask the question differently, which is a constant process that we're trying to put in place, but it's not, you don't always have the answer, but you have to keep trying.
That's a very nice way to put it. And I am so glad that this conversation has come down to cities and histories, because that's what our third session is about, and how our archiving projects need to become about the cities, or eventually they will, whether we know it or not. So with that, we will call this session a close. Thank you so much again, Suhasini and Sameer, for joining us and sharing all your possible knowledge and answering the questions. And we'll all take a 15-minute break. Suresh is here for the last session. We're looking forward to cities and histories. Suhasini, Sameer, Neha, if you all want to stay back and join us, we'll take a 15-minute break and start at 5. So please stay around.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you.
has worked with different kinds of archival histories or archival collections and written books about which tell us about the city. I thought that was a very important transition for all of us in terms of our discussions to grow into. Suresh Jairam really needs no introduction, so I'm going to keep it short.
My own space, which is called One Shanti Road, which is home for me and home for many others who come to Bangalore, either temporarily, because it's an artist residency, more of an artist residency and art space rather than an art. More than a art gallery, it is a space that morphs into being an artist residency, an art space, and probably an informal archive for people who want to know more about the city, and also a certain kind of space where I just call myself the yellow pages of Bangalore, because people keep calling me for random things of where to get what or how to do something, etc. I happily share this information with people, and it's something that grew out of my being super inquisitive, and I think when I started working on this book, which commemorates 15 years of this space, somebody told me that, why do you want to archive it? Why should it become a book? And now this book is being referred by many people because it kind of puts together not only One Shanti Road as an alternative art space, but all the other spaces that have disappeared. So there's one whole article about the other spaces of Bangalore, like Jaga, morphed into something else, possibly Samoha, which was a one-year project. Then there's Bar One, which is existing but doesn't have a space currently. So there are all these things that are happening in Bangalore. I'm not saying that Shanti Road is the only place. I also wanted to archive what is happening in the city as such. Because how do these spaces function? One is the main important thing for all projects is finances. And most importantly, where to start these spaces. I think it has to begin from one's own garage, own home, etc. I think that's the only place. Because these are the spaces that give you freedom, and you could do what you want, and you could even, you don't pay rent, most importantly. And you could morph it into many other things. Like here it started from my parents' home. Next, also asking questions, who are you, what is your ancestry, and I was hearing, I want to talk to my grandmother. So did I talk to my grandmother? Yes, I did talk to my grandmother. And I very diligently made notes. I wanted to find out what and where she was at a certain time. So there were not specific dates, but there were instances. She said things like random things like apple growing in the garden where they were having a farmhouse. It was more of an orchard and very close to Lal Bagh. So this was one point. And so how did the apple come there? How did the apple tree come there? Is it fake information or she's pulling a fast one on me? I don't know, because she thought I'll eat my food if she tells me a story like I grew apples. So, but it's fascinating for me, The other thing she said, the tiger escaped from the Lal Bagh cage. So, was there a tiger? So another information about what were the animals in the Lal Bagh Zoo, and was there a zoo, and why was there a zoo in a botanical garden? So eventually I found out that not only there was a tiger, there was an ostrich, there were kangaroos, there was a chimpanzee from Sumatra, and which would imitate human beings as they used to pass on a BD and it used to smoke and stuff like that. Like funny things, they're totally trivial. I don't think, and I like this trivial information, where it leads me to something else. And in the story, I said, what happened to the tiger? Who did it kill? He said, so they called somebody who was a shikar and he had a gun. So he shot around the tiger and didn't shoot the tiger and made the fighting the tiger to get back into the cage. So there was a tiger, there was references to all these other animals, including elephants. So one aspect of a zoological kind of a thing in a botanical garden, an aviary, etc. Then coming back to the apple tree, it has a Goethe-Institut connection. I found went back to Lal Bagh again, which has a wonderful archives, but it's close to everybody. It is a typical Babu place. So they will ask you if you're doing a PhD. They'll say, come tomorrow, the librarian is not there, or she's pregnant, or something like that. They'll just try to push you away. And at the same time, you need to somehow figure out ways of going to the back door, or jumping into the archive through the window, or I don't know, anything, beg, borrow, steal. You want information. So if you get that information, what do you do with it? Is it going to support your theory? Or is it going to lead you somewhere else into some other, like, as I said, chimpanzee or apple or tiger or something. So they had a problem, the archive had a problem. So this is a point where I could enter the archive. So they told me that they wanted to archive and preserve botanical drawings which are there. So I said, sure enough, we'll give you advice what to do. So the botanical drawings were sent to my alma mater, Chitrakala Parishad, to be preserved and photographed and documented. So what I did was, there was a documentation of it. So what was inaccessible was accessible. So I had a CD of which that I should not have, but this is the story, and I put this in the book. And I realized through not only historical sources, and through lawyers that if it is 100 years old, you don't have to take permission. And who does it belong to? It belongs to the state, and they're not ready to publish this botanical drawings. Either they think that they're going to make money out of it, or the other thing is that till day, I don't know how this man who did this 1,000 botanical drawing looks like. There's no record of it. There's only a record which says paid him 10 rupees or 20 rupees per month to do these botanical drawings. His name is Chelubhaiya Rajan. So curiosity about this painted record of plants that were there, that were imported and were asked to be made into botanical drawings. And their grandmother story, Krishnamma, from the family album I got photographs of her, and I realized that I told you there was a Goethe-Institut connection. I found out they were a German botanist and landscape architect called Gustav Hermann Krutiger, who incidentally designed the Kamati Park in Baroda, and he designed Kaban Park, Lal Park, and the Vrindavan Garden. So, Travancore, so many other places also. So that was my first, I think, I can say successful archival digging, which kind of even surprised the Germans, because they Googled Krumbiegel and they didn't find anything. Then after that, I became like, everything about Krumbiegel was sent to me. So there was a PhD on Krumbiegel. After that, there was in Dresden, there was some exhibition which was called Gardeners to the Maharaja, or some exhibition like that. So, and I found out Krumbigel's surviving family that has come into the picture in a big way and want to start a Krumbiegel Foundation, Alia Krumbiegel. And she's very, very active in the Heritage Beku group. So, a lot of things happen because of this curiosity about this apple tree. Then, if you look at the cover of the Lal Bagh book, it is a postcard which was collected by our friend's father. So, do you have any minutes?
I'm just looking. I don't think I have the cover.
Yeah, the cover is there. The first few images are all postcards.
This is the cover.
No. This one here. This is one of it, but this is there. Yeah, this one.
Okay.
So Lal Bagh still looks like this, maybe plus or minus there might be.
Your voice is completely off, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can hear me now?
Yeah, now yes.
Okay. So here were postcards which were, how photographs circulated. So then I discovered that there is a SOAS PhD being done on postcard cities. It was Bangalore and Chennai. And there were so many postcards that were being sent by the British to their families. And these were some of the postcards. Most of these postcards were about Kabul Park and Lal Bagh. So next slide. Here is how my road, the road that leads to Lal Bagh looks like. And these were something that I'd never seen. So I thought every page of the book which I wrote has to visually support the narrative. So what is the use of being an art historian and being a very visual person? So make the book also speak through images. So that was another interesting thing. So again, found out artists who had drawn. I found this guy called Majumdar who was working in Bangalore and in a museum, Vishesharaya Technical Museum, and he was drawing the city, and he retired. So, and he said that he had sold these images to Lal Bagh, and he was happy to share it with me. I told him, listen, I can't pay you much, give you something if the book is published, but can I use these images? And negotiating with people is a very, very important skill one needs to learn. And you need, another thing is that what am I going to do with all this material? I invested it into the book. And somehow it's made accessible. The visuality of the city that people want to look at in whichever perspective is made accessible through the book. So many aspects of the book are part of a larger network of people who have tried to work with. So there were two next. So these are photographers. Sorry, these are photographers of two Australians who came and wanted to photograph botanical specimens in the city, and they were doing this interesting way of photographing them, taking them into a dark room and lighting them through a small torch, micro torch. So you get this fantastic things, and they project it on a large screen. So it really looks extremely surreal. Yeah, there's another one. Something so simple as a champa or a frangipani looks fabulous. Your bottle brush. So I told these guys, listen, please let me stuff which I can put in the book. And this is my colleague and friend Sandeep, who was kind of literally bribed to go to Lal Bagh to take this, because he said, I'm so lazy, I don't want to get up in the morning. So I had to coax him to go. And he thought, okay. Then I said, okay, give him a kind of an award, like I'll take you for breakfast after that, or something like that, to MTR or wherever. So you have to have people who will also work with you. And archiving, although it's a very individual solo experience of working, it also involves people and friendships. So this is how each one of them have contributed to the book. And although I am the author, all these people have added to this whole idea of making of the book. As I will talk about the book later on. Here again, morning walks. Now suddenly there is no camera can be used in public spaces. You have to take permissions.
But
So
phones all the time, no? So
yeah, and another story is, I believe even if you want to draw, you have to take permission.
Yes, in Humphrey. What's the reason? Reasoning?
I don't know.
National safety. Just take the mic when anyone talks. I don't want you to do.
Okay, the last picture there. Here is a picture which is very fascinating. Not from Bangalore, but it has a Bangalore connection. So Sandeep, who's this photographer, was taken to the city market once, and he saw these jasmine flowers, mallige. So, and he just jumped into one of the tractors that brings them from Tamil Nadu. He went back into this. I encouraged him. I said, take a holiday with him. He went and stayed in Tamil Nadu in Krishnagiri for about 3 or 4 days. Saw how the Malige Hua, as in the jasmine flowers, are picked in the middle of the night, almost 3 o'clock in the night, and they packed and sent to Bangalore the same morning because it's so fragile. So this story, I mean, we've all seen Malige Hua everywhere, right? But we don't know how it comes to Bangalore. And there's a lot of exploitation, labor, caste, hierarchies. There's so much part of this. So Sandeep comes very happily with these photographs and he says, now please give me a show in Shanti Road. But I told him that what is the point in showing them in Shanti Road? So show them in the marketplace. Again, the drama of asking BBMP, city market people, managed to show it, blew them up in large, huge poster size. And what was fascinating, all these people who were connected with the market and the selling of flowers came and recognized these images and saying, oh, she's my auntie, she's this friend's mother and all that. So there's immediate audience. So a very important thing is, where do you take this? And it's very happy that you discover things through the archival research and you keep it with you and feel very content with it, but it's very important to disseminate things in whichever form. It can be a small show, it could be a set of postcards, which can be your next gift, Christmas gift, a family archive or whatever. And even involve the family, saying that here is your grandmother or grandfather, or some quote or something like that. So each one of us are living archives of so many
generations.
Yeah, generations, and every time somebody passes away, I think that the whole archive disappears. And only people like us who are kind of curious or who want to dig into the past, want to somehow get into working with the archive. And the book itself, you want to publish, again this is self-published, and you all of might think, oh, Suresh Jairam is very rich, I didn't have the money, and the person who funded it started wanting to fund it is my walker friend in Lal Park. And he said that I'll get you funding, but Corona happened, and all the money went into trying to save people and lives. The book was least important. It so happened that after that we realized that we should not ask one person, you ask many people, and the book is actually crowdsourced. It's not, I didn't spend anything, I made sure I invested in the design, the photography, and choosing the material, etc. But crowdsourced by Rohini Lekani Foundation and others, because they thought it is something that one would give back to the city. And it has a lot of stories about my father's photographs also, and he being an amateur photographer, and my family photographs are part of this book. As I told you, there are postcards, there are drawings and anecdotes. So it became very anecdotal, and the voice that I've used in the book is very almost like taking you for a walk and talking about history in a very personal, narrative sense, and involving ones in this whole process. So this was one aspect of the book, and if I want, I'll not talk much about this other book, which is called the One Shanti Road Cookbook. So what do you do with recipes? And believe me, before this book, which was published in 2019, I'd never written a recipe in my life. I can cook, but I can't write down recipes. I have to see to cook. So it involves other people. It involves friends like Reliable Copy, Nihal, Faisal, young artists, Sasija Subramanian, who approached IFA for a grant to work on the cookbook as an art project. They got a grant, so they took 1 year to research. They asked me to collect recipes from my mother, my grandmother. Some were written, some had to be cooked and written later on. So you had to reinvent the recipe. So taste it and say, okay, what went into it? because the grandmother said they put so much of so much. So the editor was saying, what is this so much? Is it half a teaspoon or a pinch, or even a pinch can change the taste. It's very subjective. So it had to be accurate, and the ingredients had to be, accessible also. So what we did was I chopped on all the people who had come to Shanti Road, cooked a meal or brought some food to Shanti Road, and we went back to them, and we kind of curated it in such a way that most of them were kind of woken up in the middle of the night and said, okay, you cooked that something that day, so you write down this recipe. So we kind of literally, not only it was not coaxing, we kind of badgered them to write this recipe. And it had to go through a process of somebody who knows cooking and will find out, if what is sauteing, how long to saute. Time is also important, right? So this is how this, and it commemorates again, after this book it commemorates, all happened during the pandemic. So the kitchen became so important, and as you know that kitchen was a favorite place of everybody during the pandemic. So it was more of recollecting memory and relishing the idea of food, maybe cooking it to experience it, and also sharing it. Because it captures the essence of Shanti Road, because there's a lot of food around most of the time. And I have a major problem tomorrow, because I have visiting German residents coming. So I got a message, which is hilarious, which says that 6 vegans, 4 vegetarians, and 3 can eat anything, and 2 will have only boiled vegetables and rice, and chili or anything should be on the side. So I'm wondering what to cook, what will I put together? So I said, this is dry. And also, please also note, this is from Goethe-Institut, please also note, nuts have to be cooked. So I just sent a message to say that this is driving me nuts. So, but I can't say don't come tomorrow. So as soon as I get back, I have to soak things and do stuff. And I also have my regular cook who wants to put chili into everything. I have to literally stand there, tie his hand up and say, no chili, and he's saying that how do you cook without chili? Who are these people coming? So I have to figure out new ways of adding chili, or obviously be a sauce. But I've never had sauce. We never have sauce in Indian food, right? It's integrated in the masala, ground, and it has to soak in the rice and all that. So a new German Indian food will be cooked tomorrow. So that will also maybe become a reference point somewhere. So it's so trivial, like Germans coming to your house, their first visit to India, they connected to the Goethe-Institut because they are the one who created this expansive residency programs, which one of the triggers have been Shanti Road residency for them. They said that they can spend more money and get more out of it through residencies than in just flying in 5 jazz musicians and having a jazz concert. Because the people-to-people connection that the residency, art residency brings about has a more healthy way of bringing people and cultures together. And which will again trigger conversations across cultures. At least I have understood Germans much better, and they've understood me, and there is a certain trust and affection that has grown for the past 10 years of residency program of Goethe-Institut, which is celebrated this year, and 20 years of Shanti program.
Wow.
So it's important to have allies, like photographers, publishers, printers, and if you want to publish a book, somebody will give you advice about paper, about scanning, about where to disseminate this information. Will it be viable if it becomes a book or not? So all these things have to fall into place. Maybe a film can also be another output. I've not tried it, but there are a lot of stories, everybody has, and it could become something very potential about the city, about the self, about family, etc., which are the most closest things one could that almost carry it like a snail just on our backs, like it's always there. We are full of stories, we are full of anecdotes, spaces, smells, food, and walking every day, etc. Let's stop here for today and open it up for conversation about whatever you want to discuss about my process. And I personally feel archive has to be accessible. There's no point us holding on to our stories and imagining that somebody else is going to discover. They will not discover. People are lazy. If you package it, they are ready to take it. And I personally feel Ishita is doing a great job. How do you convince institutions to create archives? They're not even interested. They think that we are all going to live forever. Whether it's NGME or Chitrakala, badgering them to make archives. And I think it's so important to record our histories. Our social histories, political histories, our personal histories for the future. And this all comes from personal history, city histories, history of how kitchen functions. I mean, some of these recipes I wouldn't be able to cook also in a traditional family context. There's everything from beef to chicken to fish to name it, which is not possible at times, like in a traditional space. But Shanti Road is what it is. It's very eclectic and bohemian, and everybody's dragged into the kitchen before they go anywhere else. So one also uses that opportunity to create something that is more tangible, like this book. And for the reliable copy, this is the second edition, I think they told me that it's their bestseller. So,
young publisher.
Yeah, it's not about monetizing something you do, but you're putting it out. And people talking about it, stopping you and saying that I got your book because I thought it would be great to give to somebody who's just come to Bangalore. So anything you want to ask or anything on your mind?
I want to start with a clarification ever since I have got the copy of the book. If you could draw the line between when is it archiving or archival research and when does it start becoming documentation or visualization? Because when I'm not read, but when I'm flipping through, now I'm confused. Which one is actually drawn or commissioned for the book? The way you right now clarified these are Sandeep's images or this was Badal's work, and the ones which are actually from the archives. So if we don't know the textures and the granularity, then at what point does it stop becoming an archival project and becomes an artistic project?
Most often what happens is you don't know that you're going to make it into a book.
Yes.
So collecting it and commissioning photographs or looking for things and just putting them into boxes and hoping that you will reuse it or revisit this thing. Like the drawings, it's giving space for something spontaneous, and it's a very serendipitous kind of activity where suddenly you're just thinking about the book, things suddenly fall into place. You suddenly realize you're sitting on that album which was never supposed to be, family album, never supposed to be part of the book. But this is what the authors said, that because it's you who are telling the story of your family, its connection to Lalpa, connection to the city, your ancestors were gardeners and they grew a lot of flowers and vegetables and fruits for the British. So tell that story, because that's a story that fascinates people.
Questions in the room?
No, I think you.
No,
demystified. Like I'm somebody who's like quite erratic in my way of working. Maybe it comes from being that bit of an artist in me is still there. Like if I see a thread, then I want to chase. I want to go down that rabbit hole. I'll forget about the structure I have planned and all. And I think Ishita is kind of getting the drift about my process in that. So in a way, I'm glad that I'm hearing your process, which is not so structured. You allowed yourself to flow at times. But I think what, at the end of this, and actually even in the last few weeks, something that I'm coming closer to is that in my project, maybe this need of the personal story needs to, needs to shine through more. And I think maybe then the value, or maybe, I don't know, it just becomes easier to validate and work with. I don't know. What do you feel? I mean, because there's, Lal Bagh as it is, as we all know, and then your connection with it. So,
as I was doing this, there was another book which was more historical, more dense, more about the history of the people who made Lal Bagh that was coming into existence. And the person is a friend of mine, so they said, okay, Ravijay Tirupati, so can you put both books together? Then it didn't work out because the textures were very different. The essence of it was also different. And they realized, they thought that Suresh is a very personal historian, but here it's more generic, it's taking into very different directions, which it was his way of looking at the same space. So I don't think there should not be another Taj Mahal or another book on Lal Bagh. And to tell you, my next project, the book is on Kamal Bagh, and the book on Kamal Bagh just got released a week ago. I'm happy it came out. And mine is totally different. Where I had to construct the archive through conversation. So there is Kamal Bagh, there is Lal Bagh. So how do I make the book differently? I can do the same methodology. So your methodology is also important. You can chase many areas, but there should be a method in the madness. What are you going to focus? Who's telling the story? And where is it going to be disseminated? These three things I think are important for an archival project. Inspired by the self or the city or a certain like Garba, a certain social event or festival or whatever. And how do you look at it rather than how everybody else's perspective? How do you look at the city? Who are your contacts? And people from all walks of life that affect me.
But I think what you're highlighting is again very important, right? So information or data collection is one step. That need not be guided towards what can become of it. This is, I think, a personal pursuit that I've been trying to argue and convince about. That if you think it's a book, you will collect in a certain way. But if you let it flow, then the data can tell you what it might want to become. So there is this dialogue between you and the data as well.
See, some way the data can lead you into what it becomes, emerges out of it. The data
that's what I
emerges
mean.
out.
Yeah, it's living.
Yeah, it's but another way is somewhere in between you'll say, okay, this information, like for that matter, somebody told me a story about a fountain in Kamal Park, and that's a fountain that I've seen all my life. And he said that very fascinating oral history, but I thought it's oral history, but it's already written somewhere. So there was a Nepali princess who lived in Bangalore. Why did the Nepali prince come to Bangalore? God knows. So I had to find out history of why the Ranas, who are actually like the prime ministers, had a problem with the royal family. So many of them migrated to Bangalore. So the Alsur Palace, which has become Shri Aurobindo Ashram, is one of the palaces. So one of them had a fancy parrot pet, and she went to Mirza Ismail, who is, as you all were talking about architecture, he is responsible for the kind of an architecture of modern architecture of Bangalore city. And he told her, she told him that this is my big problem. I don't know what is going to happen to my pet project parrot after I die. We don't think about it like it. So, and she gave him 5,000 rupees those days. And he said, don't worry, I'll take care of the parrot. In this 5,000 rupees, he's very smart. He didn't return the 5,000 rupees. He said, in your name, I'm going to make a fountain where more people can enjoy this fountain. And it is called Rani Maharani Sahib of Bhajan, stone plaque, somewhere in some part of the fountain. And the fountain still exists. And I believe the story about the parrot is Madam went to Bombay with the parrot. She died there, the parrot flew away. So, but in the process, Bangalore got a fountain. So we don't know, I mean, this interesting story is there, but how do you tell this story? So we keep telling, okay, box article. So you put them in small boxes, then it's your curatorial and creative energies that will bring it together. You don't know, I mean, trivial information can lead into something that is very interesting and fascinating.
There's some story about the fountains that obscured.
You will need to use a mic. Sorry.
About that fountain.
Fountains in Kaban Park curing people.
No, sorry, I'm just recollecting that there is some story, one of those two Bangalore stories, that fountain had the water splashing in a manner that obscured the story of the parrot in some way, or the parrot's image was hidden behind the splashes of water. Some kahani, some nice juicy story.
Yeah,
So you're getting new connections.
New connections. Yeah. See, what I'm trying to say is even gossip can be archived.
Yes, totally.
And I can tell you, because what is gossip actually? It's networking. It's something to talk about, and somebody is telling you a story, and you need to listen. You need to be a listener. And if it's trivial, chuck it. If there's any potential in this gossip, pursue it.
So this is coming from someone who's very new to archival research and just sort of trying to understand what this is. So why do you think it's so important to record something like recipes? Like why do you think archiving is?
I didn't think. They thought. They made me the instrument to collect the recipes. I'm the editor of the book.
I have an added question to that, so we'll juice it up.
I mean, my
Not just the recipes, but
I like cooking, I like eating, I like feeding people. That is my background. So, but I never thought about recipe. So they were smart enough to say that if Suresh is doing all this, there has to be something behind it. So, recipe book. So, I mean, this was the brightest idea they got.
So I'll add to this simply because I think it layers it up. How convinced were you to put family recipes and crowdsourced or other recipes in the same book? What does that mean for you?
I mean, the introduction says it all, because it starts off by saying that how this food was cooked in Shanti Road. My grandmother having an open house, my mother having an open house. The only tradition that I am continuing is this. I ask people come and eat.
So it's a matter of family legacy.
Yeah. If there's any legacy, it's come and eat. That's it.
I'll just add to that food thing, because a lot of these recipes from Bangalore have fascinating history. So Lal Bagh itself, for example, is known for the Indira Gandhi and the other Congress split there in the glass house. So outside the vendors even now and all over Bangalore, you find Congress masala, Congress groundnuts. That's because the groundnut is split into two, and the split happened right outside the Lal Bagh area. So it's like even those recipes are like really like.
It's called Congress Kadlekai. It's there in the book.
Yeah, so you've got communist masala, and you've got lots of.
This is gossipy.
Yeah.
So like this gossipy bit has a truth, because even today you get Congress masala. So it's a peanut that is split. So and it's got a lot of chili in it, and obviously Congress party is quite spicy in its own way.
And we also call the thorn on the roads. Those we call as Congress.
Congress, yeah.
Anyway.
There's also this grass in North India that's called Congress.
The same thing.
Oh wow, it's called the same in the north. Oh wow.
So I believe in that period when the Congress ruled, they were importing wheat from America, and this wheat
Parthenium.
Parthenium, yeah. And My friend said that she collected Parthenium, because it looked so pretty, and put it in a vase and, for her mother's birthday. And the mother is asthmatic, she kept sneezing and coughing the whole day. So it was the Parthenium, however pretty it looks. And Bangalore, for that matter, has largest pollen collection, right?
Yes.
Thanks to Mr. Kundigal and others who have bought it. Like 80% of the trees you see in Bangalore are not made in India. Yeah. And we've adopted it happily.
They have adapted us, is what also I noticed. The
Yeah.
way African tulip is growing.
Yeah, and the idea of this, before even the global climb of Bangalore being a global tech city, it became a botanical cosmos. It was trees from different parts of the world coming here and blooming and thriving.
Srini has a question.
Yeah, so actually we got in our archives, we just got this book dedicated to Krumbigal by a botanist from the 1920s who has a lot of these illustrations in black and white as lithographs in it. So I'm like really curious now to see whether a lot of these artworks were done for him. So can you just tell me the era in which you found those artworks in? This is a 1920s book.
I think this is slightly before that. It's probably, if they're black and white, it could be botanical drawings which are taken from the same book.
Oh wow.
It's not a book incidentally, it's a folio. Means it is, what is it? It's just a box of images, drawings, botanical drawings. Basically, botanical drawings look beautiful to you now, but why they were done to very specifically, look at study in botany with accuracy. So who was this painter that was chosen? He was a Mysore traditional painter, and he never had done something so accurately. He was doing in a very traditional, Mysore traditional way of stylizing things. So he was taught how to paint to look through the colonial lens, to look at botanical specimens, which is realistic. So the drawing is fantastic. Even today, I believe somebody had a grouse, I think Vijay Tiruvati, my friend, a fellow walker, has more information about all these things. And he says that even now the Kew Garden is not acknowledged Chelavaya Raju as much as he should be. So he's this hidden gem. Nobody knows how he looked like.
So in a way, these were ways to document.
Yes.
This was a form of documentation of those times.
So if I see the book or if you send me the image, I can tell you they're similar. Because I have a repository of these.
I'll get it.
Anyone from the other side of the screen has questions, comments for Suresh? Why am I looking there? I'm supposed to look here. Anyone, anything? I know it's been a very long day. Okay, so then with that, I'm going to say thank you, Suresh, very much for spending time with us. And I think a very inspiring end, isn't it, for the day? Yes, she will clap. And we have Priya with us. Priya, do you want to share a few thoughts? So Priya is here on behalf of Heritage Beku. Yes, Priya, over to you. Closing remarks. Your voice is cracking. No, still cracking. Even without the camera. I think it's internet.
How's it now?
Yeah. Much better. Very nice.
No, I can still feel the crackling, but yeah, hey, we'll take that in our stride. First, thanks so much. It's been I've dived into the session today and enjoyed some of the storytelling a lot. Of course, I could relate to the immediate last speaker, Suresh, extremely well because now I'm going to sort of pin him down and say, hi Suresh. I'm going to pin him down and say, hey listen, can I just figure out that last little documentary, or rather the last video you took of me. So where is it going to eventually go? Because we spent a lot of time on it in Kavan Park and we had a great time doing it. While I've been kidding about this, I think what's interesting is we're constantly picking up bits and pieces and vignettes and stuff. And I think from some of the conversations which I've been hearing, we're encouraged so much to do. Sorry, am I upside down?
No, everything's clear.
We're encouraged. Sorry about that. Yeah, we're encouraged so much to do the, the work with a vision and then work backwards and then get information to go in a certain direction. I think suddenly when the conversations were happening, I could understand that there's a certain freedom in this. And I think that is, I think something really awesome, that you can allow something to flow. Again, this was for me very applicable when Suresh was talking about his journey. Whether you look at the recipes of One Shanti Road, or you look at the book, which is fantastic on Lal Bagh, the Kumpital book that was released. So again, we're seeing output, but there is a certain beauty about stuff that also sort of remains and then gets uncovered and then comes together in this wonderful, little basket that we call, your cultural heritage, and stories are really where it's all at. So this has been fascinating. I know we've done something before with you, Ishita, on Curating for Culture, and that has been directed more at the children. And this one has been quite an experience, and I'm sure that there will be some wonderful things that come out of it. I want to say thank you for stretching and doing this, because this requires a completely different hat. It requires, I think, for us to kind of jump in and think differently and allow a certain flow. And I think it's very, very frightening for most of us who've been taught to be a particular structure or taught to move towards very finite ends, to have the courage to kind of let go and allow those things to flow and happen. So thank you for that. I think it's been very interesting. From Heritage Beku, we're very, very happy to support something like this and to partner with Curating for Culture and with you, Ishita. Heritage Beku has been focused on whether it's natural, built, or cultural heritage, but this is the space I think that gets covered the least. So it's really important that we have done this today. As importantly, when I look at the fact that Heritage Beku has become in some ways perhaps the strongest voice of the citizen, without any layers, without any structure, without having to sort of be anything else, I'm sort of happy with what I think the spaces that we have chosen to be part of, represent, fight, though it's very, very frustrating for somebody to always assume that we would be there only when there's something to be fought. I think we should also be there when there's something to protect or there's something to celebrate. And that I hope we do more of in 23. We hope that we have a lot of people who would come in and partner and support Heritage Beku in our collective journey towards celebrating and maintaining and protecting Bangalore's heritage, Karnataka's heritage as well. Our focus has been Bangalore because I think what we have seen crumble in the last couple of decades has been something that has been profoundly painful for us, as opposed to the kind of development our city has seen. So there's no either or. I think what we're really being very constructively greedy about is the and of saying we can have both. Nobody's denying that we should have be the city that is so aspirational, that's such a magnet. Maybe as another person spoke recently, we should demagnetize a little bit and make ourselves a little less attractive to investors pouring in. But to be able to keep the both, and to be both logical and sensible and change perspectives, to have people immerse themselves more in heritage, I think is really the crux. So I won't say anything more. I just want to say how much I've enjoyed this afternoon session. And Suresh, I'm going to sort of look back and re-listen to your talk because it was so interesting. Ishita and your team, absolutely fantastic work, and all the people who've collaborated for this. thanks for the tremendous stretch, and really look forward to sort of doing this with you a little bit more. Ishita, over to you, and thank you once again from all of us at Heritage Beku who've been so proud to partner with you.
Thank you, Priya. Suresh, you wanted to say something?
No, I'll take a walk with her and speak to her privately.
I can't hear you very well.
No, I can take a walk with you and tell you what I'm going to do with your interview.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to that because I actually enjoyed that chat. The nice thing I think with Suresh is you're always sort of moving into completely different spaces and territories. You're doing a math one day, you're doing something else. But eventually, all I ever come away with is respect for the creative process, the respect for the mind that thinks differently. I am so grateful to be surrounded by people like this. I'm not one of them, so I'm always particularly appreciative. So yes, Suresh, I'm going to hold you to that walk.
Welcome. Let's do it quickly.
Great. Thank you both so much. And I liked what you mentioned, Priya, that we started with archives and we talked about a book, and then you said that leftover is still in the basket of cultural heritage. I think that was a clap moment, even though we didn't, because archiving projects do lead to new forms of archives also.
Yeah.
So yes, that's very true. And yes, we will keep celebrating with you and bring Heritage Beku back on board every time we do something in Bangalore. Thank you so much for collaborating with us. On that note, we all must thank Goethe-Institut, at least all of us who are here, and hopefully you all had a seamless tech experience. It's because Goethe-Institut offered their place to do these activities on site after 3 years of doing it online. Many thanks to Shivalli, who's my former student but a friend now, and she's helped with documentation. And Amal, who's been a tech person sitting in the room, and I hope some of this conversation was interesting for him. Thank you everyone for staying along till 6. That is really long, 9:30 to 6. I really hope it makes more meaning over the time, and we'll have a reflective session tomorrow morning either ways. Thank you. Have a lovely Saturday evening. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.